The more I remember about Halo Combat Evolved, the more I'm surprised that the game didn't promote itself as a horror game. The introduction of the Flood in the campaign was a surprising tonal shift, and I get pretty jumpy when their tendrils skitter and swarm towards me, not to mention the body horrors that this parasitic race commits. Even earlier missions have this chilling silence as you anticipate the enemies round every corner. But I'm not even here to talk about the Flood or anything in the campaign. I'm here to talk about the multiplayer maps. The multiplayer maps are filled with this intense ambience that becomes impossible to ignore. This map, named Sidewinder, is a wide open gulch of ice and snow, yet the wind breathes down your neck like a vengeful spectre. I know I should be alone, but as I traverse the map, I can't help but feel as though the life of this place was snuffed from me at the last second, snatched away from me moments before I decided to enter. Scale and grandiosity is everywhere within the design of Halo maps, with most maps having these impossibly large skyboxes that feel unfathomably epic in scale, or these colossal halls of ancient titans. Other places are a bit less tangible, like this map, a twisting series of small rooms and teleporters, a mechanical churn reverberating throughout the complex, that churn feeling just as close to you no matter where you are in the labyrinth. Travelling in these places alone just doesn't feel right. I've had a pretty deep interest in liminal spaces the past few months, probably spurred on by the fact that for those months we were all kind of living in one when the peak of the pandemic hit. Liminal spaces are places that are transitionary, such as an empty corridor of a school during lesson time, an empty shopping centre or a mall, or an empty car park late at night. Beaches, like this one, are a good example of a natural liminal space, as they stand between the threshold of land and sea, and it's probably why I quite like these beaches in Halo. Usually I like to see how far I can go underwater before an invisible wall hits. Beaches are also familiar and have connotations of calm and restfulness. Seeing them without people isn't entirely infeasible either, so I don't feel uneasy being in this space by myself. But the internet has looked at more abstract depictions of these liminal spaces, and I find this sense of liminality within Halo's multiplayer maps in particular when by yourself. You have weapons, grenades, vehicles, vast structures, and an ambience that would suggest life did take place, but for some reason it hasn't. There's an undeniable liminality to these places, and the ambience really hammers that in. Of course, I'm aware that I'm signing up to play on a multiplayer map alone here. I'm defeating the purpose of its existence to have more than one person on a map. But if I didn't see Halo's design as something unique, I wouldn't be running around these places looking for hidden crevices or items. I wanted to take a step back from the usual in this video. After all, I haven't really done a video essay on games since 2020, but I just wanted to show you this marvel of atmos and design, this luscious world that we've seen slowly die off, this graveyard of memories. The maps of Halo 3 are by far the most familiar feeling to me. It was the only time I played Halo online with people across the world, and the map design in the later games are a tad better in design concept. High Ground is a particular standout both in nostalgia and map design. There's a clear attack and defense, with vehicles at the tide's reach ready to breach the main gates at the top of the hill, and miniguns to fend off those vehicles. It's clear to see which game modes were ideal to use in this map. I can see capture the flag modes working well, a defensive territory map, team deathmatch, or Slayer as it was called back then. This is not a happy accident either. They were designed with certain game modes in mind when looking at how the geography of the map worked. This is why free-for-all works better on maps with a lot of small corridors, because it allows for one-on-one combat to happen without some random sniper stealing your kill from halfway across the map. But those free-for-all focused maps, as a result, lack a clear history or an understood context that High Ground does. These corridors are kinda drab, empty, and painfully labyrinthine to go through. As someone looking at the context of this map, I can see the implied history of its location. And the human architecture of the base shows that they were attacked by enemy forces, as shown by the debris within the base. But it's up to you to fill in the other gaps. Not because they didn't provide enough information, but because they don't need to provide that information for us to understand where we are. It's not a location that feels out of place for Halo. It's all pretty easy to follow because the map does a good job of providing that context for the player to understand the world of events that they're taking part in, even if it is just free-for-all chaos. But when I wander this map, it's empty. There should be people shooting at one another or riding in vehicles, but there aren't, and I feel like this way of playing the game, even if an unconventional method of playing, is something I did quite a lot as a kid within this genre of games. Why I did this, I don't know, but we move. I, in a way, created my own experience of Halo that perhaps wasn't anticipated by the developers of the game itself. Daniel Muriel and Jerry Crawford, who wrote Video Games as Culture, argued something in favour of how players interact with video games a lot differently than perhaps film or television. It is frequently argued that in video games, players do not merely consume a pre-established piece of media, but instead are active participants in the creation of their experience. This definitely holds true for me, and sometimes the game encourages the player to create their own personal experiences within the game, like I did wandering alone. The Forge mode in Halo provides loads of possibilities for this, allowing players to alter the map's assets to create their own game modes. You begin to see the world not as a pre-established arena for combat, but a world to be shaped with agency by the player, using these maps as a base for their own creativity. There are maps similar to High Ground, such as Last Resort, which is a remake of a Halo 2 map named Zanzibar. A little extra thing, or, well, two little extra things, is that there are parts of the map you can, as a player, physically interact with. When I was exploring the map on my own, seeing my cursor turn red while running around was very exciting. I really don't see this in a lot of other shooters that I play that often. I hit this thing, and then suddenly there's a platform. From there, I was like, wow, I need to find everything else this map is hiding. Do you see how that suddenly made me more interested in finding stuff within the map, to explore it a bit more sincerely, going past the relevant points for objectives or combat hotspots? There was suddenly an objective for me, a singular player, to do on a map designed to be full of people. Multiplayer shooter maps aren't exactly known for their proclivity to encourage exploration, so finding it here was a lovely surprise for me. I found that you can open these gates as well, which allows vehicles to pass through into this factory, and it has this nice little message on the screen once you do so. Halo 3's maps, if you noticed, are more laid back and idyllic. My favourite maps on 3 all are these open, beautiful landscapes with these silvery bunkers plonked in places for teams to haul up in. We have Valhalla in its luscious valley of green, Standoff in its golden meadows, and the expansive horizon of Snowbound. Something tells me that the reason I enjoy these maps is partially because some of the scenery I had around me growing up is similar to these Halo maps, which I explored all the way back in my first ever video on nostalgia in video games. I grew up not too far from the coast and also in quite a luscious green expansive part of the UK, so it provides this type of reflective nostalgia that produces this sensation of looking at a picture of your childhood home. Halo 3 does have some unsettling moments, however, especially in maps relating to sand. In both Sandbox and Sand Trap, there are these large metal walls that are seen out of the bounds of the map, caging you in. There are also these towers with a glowing golden light, all facing in towards you wherever you are on the map. Immediately, I am taken to the idea of myself being in an arena, and that makes me feel watched. Suddenly, we're gladiators in a coliseum, and if you try to leave, Sandbox ramps this feeling up to 11. There is an artificial light that floods the arena. You then find that it's the lights from these towers. You try to leave and then this happens. This genuinely made me jump in fright despite knowing what was about to happen. What's worse is that you don't just die passively. You were killed by something called the Guardians. The Guardians is actually just a user-friendly way of saying that the game doesn't know how the player died, so it uses the Guardians as a placeholder. When you're someone that doesn't understand the game mechanics and conventional means of handling in-game errors, however, the dread of seeing that death tag being applied to you is palpable. And I imagine that if I were playing this game for the first time now, I would know that seeing that death tag would probably still unnerve me just a tad. This is where I bring Halo Combat Evolved back to focus. Everything is explainable in Halo 3. There's a comfortable reason for a lot of the structures to exist within the world of the game, and a fair amount of the maps actually appear in some sort of capacity within the game's campaign itself. But the first game? It's a liminal nightmare. We have something like Longest, which is just a dimly lit, lengthy corridor filled with ridiculous platforms and confusing mini corridors. There's no indication as to where we actually are in reference to anything outside of this corridor. This maze of teleporters and small rooms is called Chiron, I don't know, I'll call it Chiron. Chiron TL34. I'm going to assume that TL means training lab, but that's only because of the paraphernalia present within the space, the hazard tape and the red paint on each entrance. You're always dreading what you might face walking from one room to the other, and it's very difficult to really know where you are in reference to anything else on the map. Safe to say this map isn't very popular to play multiplayer in, but its unnerving atmosphere is, conversely, one of the strongest in my opinion. There's also the map Boarding Action, which in essence is a spaceship that's been sliced vertically in two, with the only way to access the other side being the teleporters found on each floor labelled 1 through 5. The incessant gargling of space immediately strikes you here. The feeling of vulnerability is heavily apparent as well. There's no one spot that is entirely protected from things like rocket launcher blasts or bouncing a grenade into some of the crevices you can just about hide in. So many of these maps, this one's called Chill Out by the way, are so devoid of its in-game contextual or narrative purpose. It's clear that these maps were kind of designed to fit as many game modes as possible within small spaces, but in what world do some of these platforms make sense? Why are these walls so sharp, these spaces so unbearably purple? There's no explanation, and I'm left feeling uncomfortable by its existence and how we even got here in the first place. As a gamer, I don't enjoy the map design, but as a person with feelings, I definitely am feeling a lot more than what I would usually be feeling in another game like this. Even in maps like Blood Gulch, there is a difference between the original iteration and its Halo 2 counterpart, Coagulation. The ambience in the first iteration is almost shouting at you that it lives, and logic dictates that you should see something that does, but nothing happened the entire time that I was playing through these maps alone. I really do appreciate the more experimental qualities of the original Halo game. The absurd geometrics within these spaces are quite unique, and it was fun to find every hidden little nook and corner of the map. I'd describe the feeling in Halo 1 as one found in horror films, those moments you have waiting before the jump scare, the glass smashing to the floor, the violins reaching the crescendo, but then nothing happens. There's something to be said about a game that can creep me out just by virtue of me walking around it, even while knowing that there isn't a threat and knowing that nothing would actually happen despite me insisting that something will pop out. Well, actually, something did happen. I was playing through the Halo 2 map Backwash, which is actually a map I don't really ever remember playing as a kid. In fact, for context, this recording is the first time I've ever seen this map as far as I'm aware. Its atmosphere is damp and constricting, and rain patters on the greenery around you, but then suddenly... just watch me react to it. This thing invaded my space. It even greeted me.
Oh, hello.
I rationally am aware that this little bot is scripted to appear, but did that stop me from trying to shoot it, to throw grenades at it? No, it did not. It's not as if there was nothing else in this map that was alive either. I saw flocks of birds flying around on their own accord. But this object has something scripted within it to cause it to function when I am near it, and that honestly for a moment terrified me. Yes, I really am sat here getting scared of Halo maps, but can you blame me? There was no warning for a scripted event to exist on the map, because I've literally seen most others and they had a consistent silence. The agency of the map's interactivity was entirely my own until this point. What made this a moment for me is that the context of a multiplayer map implies that the agency of the human player's interactivity within the map is the sole progression of the narrative of the game. Players fulfill the objectives one by one until a player or a team wins. That's the story here. Whereas in a story mode of a game, the game's narrative set pieces, or the players reaching a checkpoint, or the scripted enemies are the drive of the game's progression, determined by the player as they reach each variable and event. In short, multiplayer maps are static, and story modes are dynamic in nature. Usually. Backwash has, in a tiny way, mixed the two here by including this little robot, this NPC that interferes with the agency of multiplayer maps, and as a player, I clearly was spooked by it interrupting my own little campaign of exploring the maps by myself. So then, why do these spaces enthrall me? Well, I've seen a few videos floating around on various liminal spaces, and some specifically about the liminality of Source Engine games. I share that same relationship with Halo's empty spaces. The temporal reality of the game is that this space is entirely defined by my existence here. Unlike reality, if I leave, the map stops existing unless someone else was to be there. Object permanence isn't as much of a thing in video games. Time also stands still here. The sun stays up, or dawn never comes, even if you're on the map for hours. In fact, the sun is actually just the illusion of the sun, a recreational rendering to signify the sun. Nothing happens if you were to somehow remove it from the map. The map doesn't go hurtling into space if you remove the sun. When a space is lacking certain qualities we associate with reality, such as the passage of time, or a familiar species, or any familiar architecture, there's that tinge of danger when approaching these spaces. If the sun were to be removed intentionally from the map by design and the players were to enter, the feeling as though something were terribly wrong would definitely be felt here. Like the motions of a shift in the tone of a story, or entering a dense jungle for the first time, or, well, the wait for players to join you in the fight, there's this transitional period of instability, this uncomfortable stillness pervading through the anxiety of a change about to occur. And Halo Combat Evolved, with its eerie ambience and awkward geometry, just brings this feeling to a higher level. I think there's also something to be said about Halo and the Source Engine I mentioned earlier, in that they've aged, and the time period we associate them with feels as though we're now stood between two very different times. I can't help but, in a sense, see the 2000s when I play through these games. I can't help but picture the context of the world outside of these games. When we view old footage, we stare at a place stuck in time, like these multiplayer maps, and see a snapshot of the world through the lens of someone living back then, but seeing it as someone existing now. There's something entrancing about these spaces, especially when something like COVID forces us to look at something like a liminal space in the everyday. But realizing that entrancing nature is when I begin to stop enjoying it. The nostalgia present in liminal spaces, in destroyed communities, in old video games are a kind of mishmash of gratitude for your past memories, and a sort of melancholy for the death of the event that has occurred. I don't go around old source maps because I don't have the emotional connection that I do with Halo. I wander these Halo maps and invite myself to remember the matches that took place between my brother and friends and online competitors. I do want to resist the urge to wish that those times were to come back somehow, because otherwise I feel like I risk sinking into and becoming ensnared within a place that was only meant to be a temporary event, and I don't want to become trapped within a liminal space. If you're not aware of the Backrooms, it's an internet horror story that involves you becoming trapped in a never-ending liminal space, and a type of existential horror is made abundantly clear, where the world stops and you're the only person left. Then other people added to the unofficial canon of the story by including other levels of the story and whatnot, which for me personally sort of diminished the overall power of the story. For me, I felt like those additions were trying to find and recreate the high of the initial story's intrigue and horror. When I run around old Halo maps, I run around chasing that high that I felt literally like over 10 years ago playing it as a child, and once I realized I was chasing a high by subjecting myself to running around an empty map, I felt frustrated and a bit melancholic near the end of my recordings, which is just like looking into those pictures of liminal spaces that feel familiar. The death of the events that took place here have happened, and all that remains are the decaying husks previously filled with life that I wish could come back. A carnival that never ends stops being fun. It turns into mechanical roleplay. But I suppose the end goal of all these fun times was to have them, not to keep them going forever, to chase that high. These liminal spaces that I run around in were never meant to be the end destination either. Liminal spaces today, in my own little personal theory, are so prevalent because of the sheer amount of popular media dedicated to preying on our obsession with our naive past selves, a sort of nostalgia craze, pointing towards the past that indicates a sense of overall well-being, a world of rose-tinted glasses and childlike curiosity. Contemporary horror does this a lot because slashers and thrillers were very popular in the 70s, 80s and early 90s. Vaporwave takes a sort of psychedelic form of nostalgic aesthetics and feelings from the music. Indie video games are known to adopt a sort of homage to the classics, pixel art and old JRPG elements prominent in even the most popular titles. We see this nostalgic tinge on the way things were to the point where we can't even see the future of us anymore. A future we don't really want to know the outcome of. A future where somewhere lies death. This map being high definition or remastered will be met with disapproval because changing it means that this space isn't even the same space we remember anymore, and that's the part that's important to us. It's like trying to remove the child within us to physically exist outside of our bodies, but by doing so, you rip out the most important part of yourself to the equation. So we try to recreate it by going through the same motions, to recreate the same world, hoping it'll feel like it used to. It's like meeting up with old friends that are just different people now. You enjoy the company, but there lies a pervasive sense of disappointment that you didn't perhaps live up to the mindless joy of times long past. I don't think people have a problem with having gratitude for your old memories, but I do think people have a problem with the death of that event in your life. There's such anxiety over death because we live in a time where we are constantly reminded of it, from climate change to disease to unjust death. And death is probably one of the only transitionary periods that everyone goes through which we know nothing about. We form attachments and relationships to spaces and things just as we do to other people, and for me, Halo is like a graveyard of memories for a time when I was really into video games and pining for a time where I could play them as much as I did back then, but knowing that I can never revisit that time again. It held many memories of the time where I grew up. And that's a transitional thing, to grow up. You can't just go back and do that again. When it comes to revisiting these places, it is important to remember that one of the key aspects to this type of liminality is isolation. When you wait for the game lobby to be eventually filled with players, you often start by yourself or one or two friends at most. You're in a sense performing a type of coded ritual for you to be let into a group of other people who are also performing the same thing, and we sit, waiting, anticipating the next group of people, then transition from one to a collective to create a game. That feeling doesn't happen often for prolonged periods of time, unless you have crappy internet or your friends are taking forever to come back online. So to deny myself that ritual and walk around these places alone, I'm constantly looking for something to entertain myself with now that the intended usage for the map is no longer what I'm using it for. But at a point, I'd found everything, or, well, I decided I found everything, and from that I just felt a little bored. In a world where an increasing number of people are in constant search for excitement and stimulation of the senses, boredom is always lurking around the corner. One of the biggest threats to the average modern human today is boredom. Boredom leaks into your psyche and sends your imagination into an impossible amount of directions, to the point where I'm running around an empty map and thinking that it's some profound experience of the soul when a scripted robot enters the map and makes some little noises. Liminality and liminal spaces offer a vast array of introspection, a checkpoint of sorts to reassess what you have done as well as where you might be going. Halo is a game that has long been in my life, much like a couple of others I've previously spoken about on this channel all that time ago. It's a point of comparison to how I enjoy the games of today, and that's why I chose this specific game to have as a reference point, because it means something to me, and it is perhaps one of the closest ways to relive that past that I crave. Liminal spaces give me the chance to ask questions about my present and future by reflecting onto the past. But I do need to remember that the future arrives one day, and this place is supposed to be a sort of eulogy of my own past. I need to remember not to let the death of this time sour the good intentions of today. I need to remember not to get trapped within the past by romanticizing the ignorance of my old self. My 9-year-old self doesn't think about bills, he just wants to play Halo. And I'm grateful to have a time where I could go through the transitional period of life through something that I can revisit in all of its ambient glory. I want to pay my respects to the grave of an event long past, without being resentful for that death. After all, If you're spending all your time in a graveyard, you're probably, dead.